What happens to Telemachus after the Odyssey? Greek mythology explained. Warning! This video contains spoilers for Homer's Odyssey, the later Greek epic known as the Telegony, and other ancient myths connected to Odysseus. Before we begin, here's one very important distinction. Everything you're about to hear after the ending of Homer's Odyssey comes from later Greek mythology, especially a lost epic called the Telegony. The original poem no longer survives, and what we know today comes from summaries written by later ancient authors. So if you've ever heard that Telemachus married Circe, or that Odysseus died after returning home, those events do not happen in Homer's Odyssey. They belong to a later continuation of the myth. Now, let's explain what happened to Telemachus after the Odyssey. Imagine waiting 20 years for your father to come home, growing up without him, hearing stories about the legendary hero named Odysseus, never knowing if he was alive or dead. Then, one day, he finally returns. Together, you defeat the men trying to steal your kingdom. Your family is reunited. Peace returns to Ithaca. For most readers, that's where the story ends. It's one of the greatest endings in all of literature. But ancient Greek mythology didn't stop there. Later, storytellers imagined what happened next. Did Telemachus become king of Ithaca? Did he continue ruling beside his father? Did he ever marry? And why do some ancient myths claim he married Circe, the same enchantress who once loved Odysseus? The answers depend entirely on which version of the myth you're reading. Let's explain. The ending of Homer's Odyssey. In Homer's Odyssey, Telemachus survives the events of the story. After years of searching for news about his missing father, he finally witnesses Odysseus's return to Ithaca. Together, father and son fight side by side against Penelope's suitors, who have spent years trying to seize the throne and force Penelope into marriage. With Athena's help, Odysseus defeats the suitors and reclaims his kingdom. At the end of the poem, Athena intervenes to stop any further bloodshed and restores peace between the families. That is where Homer's story ends. Odysseus is alive. Penelope is reunited with her husband. Telemachus finally has the father he barely knew. Homer never tells us what happens next. There is no mention of Odysseus's death. There is no marriage for Telemachus. And there is no journey to Circe's island. Those stories belong to a later tradition. Did Telemachus become king? One of the biggest questions readers ask is whether Telemachus eventually became king of Ithaca. Surprisingly, Homer never answers it directly. Since Telemachus was Odysseus's only legitimate son, he would naturally have been the heir to the throne. Most scholars believe he would have succeeded his father after Odysseus's eventual death. But Homer's Odyssey never describes that moment. Instead, the poem ends with peace restored and the future left open. This allows readers to imagine that Odysseus ruled Ithaca for many more years before Telemachus inherited the kingdom. The later myth called the Telegony. Several generations after Homer, another Greek poet wrote a sequel called the Telegony. Unlike the Odyssey, the original poem has been lost. Everything we know comes from brief summaries preserved by later writers. The Telegony tells a very different story. Instead of ending with Odysseus's triumphant return, it continues his life after the events of the Odyssey. It also introduces a new character, Telegonus, the son of Odysseus and the enchantress Circe. This is where Telemachus's story takes a dramatic turn. The death of Odysseus. According to the Telegony, Telegonus grows up on Circe's island without ever meeting his father. Eventually, he sails to Ithaca searching for Odysseus. Neither man recognizes the other. A fight breaks out. During the battle, Telegonus accidentally kills Odysseus with a spear tipped with the poisonous spine of a stingray. Only after the battle does he discover the terrible truth. The man he has killed is his own father. It's one of the greatest tragedies in later Greek mythology. And it changes Telemachus's future forever. Telemachus leaves Ithaca. After Odysseus's death, Telegonus is overwhelmed with guilt. He carries Odysseus's body back to the island of Aeaea, where Circe lives. Penelope and Telemachus accompany him. This marks the end of Telemachus's life in Ithaca, at least according to the Telegony. Instead of becoming king immediately, he leaves his homeland and begins an entirely new chapter far from Greece. Again, none of this appears in Homer's Odyssey. It exists only in the later myth. The marriage that shocked readers. The most surprising part of the Telegony comes next. According to the surviving summaries, Telemachus marries Circe. At the same time, Telegonus marries Penelope. To modern readers, these marriages seem incredibly strange. After all, Circe had once been Odysseus's lover. Now she was supposedly marrying his son. The ancient summaries never explain why these marriages happened. Some historians believe they symbolized the union of two branches of Odysseus's family. Others think the later poet simply wanted to connect every major character before ending the story. Since the original poem no longer exists, we'll probably never know the author's true intention. Did Telemachus become immortal? Some later traditions add another fascinating detail. They claim Circe used her divine powers to grant immortality to Telemachus, Penelope, and Telegonus. If those traditions are correct, Telemachus never returned to an ordinary human life. Instead, he remained on Aeaea, alongside the immortal enchantress. These stories are far removed from Homer's original ending and reflect how Greek mythology evolved over time as different poets added new chapters to familiar legends. Which story is the real one? This is where many people become confused. The answer depends on which ancient source you're reading. If you're reading Homer's Odyssey, Telemachus survives, reunites with his father, and the story ends peacefully in Ithaca. If you're reading the Telegony, his life continues after Odysseus's death, eventually leading him to Circe's island, and an unexpected marriage. Neither story replaces the other. The Odyssey is the original epic. The Telegony is a later continuation written by another poet. Most modern adaptations, including Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey, are expected to follow Homer's version rather than the later myths. Why Telemachus's story still matters. One reason Telemachus remains such a fascinating character is because his journey mirrors a universal experience. At the beginning of the Odyssey, he is uncertain, inexperienced, and overshadowed by his father's legendary reputation. By the end, he has become a capable warrior and a worthy heir to Ithaca. Whether you stop with Homer's ending or continue into the Telegony, Telemachus represents the next generation. His story reminds us that every legendary hero eventually passes the torch to someone else, and every ending becomes the beginning of another story. Final thoughts. So, what happened to Telemachus after the Odyssey? According to Homer, we simply don't know. The Odyssey ends with Odysseus, Penelope, and Telemachus reunited and peace restored in Ithaca. Everything beyond that comes from later Greek mythology, especially the Telegony. In that later tradition, Odysseus is accidentally killed by his son Telegonus. Telemachus leaves Ithaca for Circe's island, marries Circe, and, in some versions, is even granted immortality. That's why it's so important not to confuse the two stories. Homer gave Telemachus a hopeful ending. Later, Greek myths imagined an entirely different future. What do you think? Do you prefer Homer's ending, where Telemachus's future is left to the imagination, or do you enjoy the surprising continuation told in the Telegony? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. For more Greek mythology explainers, the Odyssey stories, movie breakdowns, hidden details, and entertainment news. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.